What's up, guys, and welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and Twitter and answer them here on this show. Also, a couple programming notes I want to give to you guys. Tonight, I'm going to have a live stream on Twitch, so please follow me there if you haven't already. I play Madden on that one. Also, if you want to chat with me live during the game this Sunday, make sure you join the Flick app. Flick is a Discord-like group chat community. It's free. It's for sports fans to talk about their favorite sports team 24/7. So if that interests you, please join the Flick. Last but not least, I want you guys to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and ding that notification bell so you don't miss my live post-game coverage of this week's game. Now that I caught you up on all that great content coming through in the next few days, let's jump into your questions. All right, this first question comes from Gunnar Peterson, who says, do you think the defenses will completely falter without Ward, and will Baker have a big game? I think, the defense, it's going to depend on their ability to get a pass rush, on how much they're going to miss Ward. Also, it's going to depend on how available DJ Shark's going to be. If he plays this week, yeah, it might be a little bit of a problem, but if he doesn't, then that kind of mitigates a little bit the problems that you're going to have not having Denzel Ward. Now, when we talk about this cornerback room and where the issue's been when it comes to depth, it's been in the middle of the field, slot corner, but you have Kevin Johnson, so you're not going to be putting Tavier Thomas in there, and it's at the safety position. It's not necessarily the edge corners, the 1 and 2 corners, your traditional cornerbacks that have been the problem. So I really don't anticipate this being terrible. Terrence Mitchell is still a good coverage corner and a good enough coverage corner to hold his own against some of these Jaguar wide receivers. So I don't anticipate that completely blowing up the defense. I think Myles Garrett is a far bigger loss on that side and a far more consequential loss. And as far as if Baker has a big game, there are things in place to make sure it doesn't happen, but there are also things that make sure it will happen. And what I mean by that is that Miles Jack is going to be a pretty strong deterrent to do a lot of the play action stuff that the Browns like to do. But also, Joe Schobert, he has been one of the worst coverage linebackers this season for Jacksonville. I think they've been asking him to do too much and cover too much space, which Joe, he's good in small bursts as a coverage linebacker, but not good when asked to do mainly coverage linebacking. And also, I think there are a lot of areas in the deep part of the secondary for Cleveland that they can attack. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. I think it's 50-50 on whether Baker has a big game this week. Also, it's going to be hugely dependent on the weather. This next question comes from C. Zachary Chad, who says, do you think we'll ever see Greedy Williams back on the field at any point this year? Look, he's out with nerve damage, and nerve damage is one of those frustrating injuries to where it's almost impossible to gauge how long he's going to be out, right? He could come back next week, and that's very likely. He could also be out for the rest of the season, and that's just as likely. Nerve damage, it's just one of those things where there's really no great way to rehab it, no great way to get it back to 100%. It's not as straightforward. While it's not as devastating, it's not as straightforward as breaking a bone or tearing a muscle, because those are things that you can kind of monitor and have happened enough to where people have these like concrete knowledge of where that muscle is in its recovery. When it comes to nerve damages, that it's like a shot in the wind. He could feel good one day, he could feel awful the next day. It's really one of those unfortunate injuries. I mean, nerve damage has really ruined a lot of careers in sports. I hope it doesn't for Greedy Williams. I hope this is something he can recover on, and I get why the staff is taking the safer than sorry approach with Greedy, whose career unfortunately has been marred by injury after injury. We really haven't seen to be able to get him on the field for an extended period of time. This next question comes from Wolf Trainer 35 Sports, who says, do you think we'll see Cincinnati Baker, or are we just going to do the run game with Nick and Kareem? Love the content. Keep up the good work. I think you're going to see a little bit of both. Look, it's not going to make a ton of sense for the Browns to not run the ball a lot, right? The Jaguars' defensive line, it's just not great. It's a lot similar to Dallas, where a lot of publicity has gone to how bad their secondary is, and nobody talks about their defensive line. And look, some good run games in the NFL struggle against good linebacker play, right? Those are more likely man schemes, right? Those are normally more affected by good linebacker play. That's the type of good run D that the Jaguars have. The Browns scheme is a little bit different, where it takes defensive line play to really disrupt that. If you don't have great defensive line play, then you're not going to have a great chance at stopping the Browns' run game. And the problem for the Jaguars is that they don't really have great defensive linemen, specifically great defensive linemen against the run. So that's going to be a big hurdle for them to get over. And I think you might see something like Dallas, where, yeah, you can attack over the air, but it might not make a ton of sense to do so because the ground game might be open to that extent. Next question comes to Corey Clayton, who says, is this game a must-win for the Browns if they want to make the playoffs? It's a must-win if you want the Browns to be able to have the easiest path possible to make the playoffs. What I mean by that is that if the Browns win this game, then you're looking at realistically 2 more games and you have a over 80% chance of making the playoffs as a wild card team, because then you beat Jacksonville. All you have to do is beat both of the New York teams who, have combined for like 2 wins in total. So those are very winnable games in New York. And you're looking at that being your pathway into entry in the playoffs. But if they do lose this game, it doesn't mean that they're out of the playoff race at all. Like that's ridiculous. But what it does mean is that the Browns are going to have a tougher path to get into the playoffs. That means that they probably have to beat either Tennessee, Baltimore, or Pittsburgh. And again, the Pittsburgh game, it doesn't look like they're going to have to start their starters at week 17. I don't know yet. We'll have to depend on where the Chiefs are. The Baltimore game, I have no idea what kind of roster they're going to be charting out in 2 weeks. I don't know what kind of roster the Browns are going to be charting out in 2 weeks. In the Tennessee game, which is going to be a tough game on the road. So it makes you have to win one of those games, which is a bigger question than beating both of the New York teams. Also, for the Browns, hey, look, the way the list has gone with people being in and out this season, you need to get your wins when you can get your wins, because you don't know if you're going to lose a player for a big game or lose a group of players for a winnable game that's going to certainly put that in jeopardy. So if you're the Browns, you have to win the games that are in front of you because the season is so uncertain. So yeah, in that respect, it's a must win. But if you're just looking at this from a purely like analytic mindset, no, it's not a must win. Next question comes from Dominic Warner, who says, do you think Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt will have a big game against Jacksonville? The more I look at it, yeah, I think they could have a huge game here. The offensive line, it depends on how healthy they're going to be. I don't know if Jedrick's going to play this game. He was out with illness. We've seen with what's going on with the list that, hey, we don't know if we're going to have these guys. So it might depend on that. But even if you don't have Jedrick, quiet is kept. He's not really the biggest factor when it comes to the Browns' run blocking. He's actually one of the weaker links in a very good run blocking offensive line. So he might not be missed that much. So yeah, I do expect Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb to be able to have a good game if they in fact play that game and if you have a full complement of offensive linemen. Next question comes from Josh Hooper, who says, hey Quincy, if Vernon continues to impress, do you think he'll be worthy of a contract extension? Also, how do you feel about Malcolm Smith and Carl Joseph getting extensions as role players this offseason? No, I'm not going to extend Olivier Vernon. That's the stance I'll take on it. Look, I'm appreciative of the game he had last week. I hope he continues to put more games together, and I hope he gets paid this offseason by somebody else. And this isn't because I don't think Olivier Vernon is a good player or could not be a good player next year. It's more or less a cap reasoning for Olivier Vernon and why I wouldn't want to extend him past this year. One, he's older and he's going to be expensive, right? If he puts close to the numbers he had at the end of his last contract, this contract, he's going to want, $10, $15 million a year. That's just really expensive, and the Browns don't need that. So I wouldn't do it. I would look to add somebody in the draft. I would probably make that your first round pick in the draft. You take a defensive end to put aside Myles Garrett and help him develop and go with that there. And then you can sign, veterans here and there to fill in the role, but it just doesn't make sense after paying Myles Garrett $25 million to also turn around and give $15 million to a 30-year-old Olivier Vernon. It really doesn't make sense. So again, I hope he plays well. I hope he gets that second contract somewhere else, but I just don't think it's going to be in Cleveland. It doesn't make a ton of sense. This next question comes from Dylan Daughtry, who says, do you think the bad weather is better for the Browns since we run the ball more than we should, or do you think the good weather is better for the Browns since our passing game can get rolling so we can run well and do play action? I do think that the Browns need to play a game in decent weather, or at least Baker Mayfield needs to have a very, very good passing game in one of these games coming up, because I think that would take a lot of pressure play to play off of the running game. Right now, you don't have OBJ, so inherently the defenses don't have any reason to respect the run. Now, again, 40-mile-per-hour winds, heavy rains. This is what Baker Mayfield has played in since Odell has gone out. So that definitely has factored into these game plans, stacking the box so heavily, because not only is it no Odell, it's also the elements are stacked against you to throw the ball, so teams are going to lean on you running the ball. That makes sense. But the Browns need to find a way to make teams respect the passing game more. It just is that way, right? Even if there is heavy winds, even if there is heavy rains, the Browns need to find a way to make teams respect them more. How do you do that? You need to have Baker Mayfield go off and put up numbers. Now, maybe they're waiting in the playoffs to see that happen so they can surprise a team with the passing game when they do stack the box. I think that's a little silly. I think you need to show teams now so you can make it easier on your running backs, and that'll get things going. Now, the play action stuff works great still, even with teams stacking the box. The run game eventually comes through in the fourth quarter, even with teams stacking the box. It's not a dire situation, but I do think it will add a nice wrinkle and add an element of fear into some of these defenses if you can add that element and add that element of fear into these defenses when they play the Cleveland Browns. But thank you for the question, Dylan. This next question comes from CT, who says, do you think picking up Baker Mayfield's fifth-year option is worth it? I say it is, even if his job is up for grabs. They're not going to spend like any higher for a third on a QB. I think you got to give Baker the fifth-year option because, hey, look, you're going to spend $20 million on him. I get that's expensive, but it's not like you have to cut players to make that number. You have cap space. Also, for Baker and for the Browns, actually, it's more important that you spend that $20 million to see what you have in his fifth year with the guy you drafted number 1 overall. That's more worth it than just giving up on a guy to save a few cap dollars, and then signing a guy off the street to be the quarterback. So that makes more sense. That's what a good organization would do. So I think he's going to get his fifth-year option. I don't think the Browns are going to do something, try to get too cute or think they're the smartest guys in the league. They seem to be past that era of Cleveland Browns type management, so I think they'll do it. The next question comes from Gridiron's Gang with JD. It's another Baker question, who says, if you had to choose to re-sign Baker now, would you, and for how long and how much per year? If you can get Baker for $20-25 million a year, I would do it. You could make it for a long amount of years. You can make it with guaranteed money. Whatever you need to do it. If you can get him for $20 million, that's a sweet spot, because if you lock him in there, that means that you can get Nick Chubb re-signed, give him good money, and keep the core of this team going for an even longer period of time. So I think that should be the target. If Baker Mayfield wants to accept that, that's awesome. If he wants more than that, he's going to have to play like a $30 million quarterback, which is to say he's going to have to carry this team, which he's not in a position to do right now. The next question comes from Elijah Cable, who says, Jacksonville has been average against the run, but 28th in the league in pass defense. Can we win it on the ground? Yeah, I think that stat about Jacksonville being kind of average in the run game, it's kind of mischaracterizing their defense. They're not great against the run. They just give up more chunk plays through the air, so that makes them look like they're worse through the air. It's kind of like Philly's run game defense, where they didn't really give up a lot of yards play to play, but they gave up big chunks. It's a similar thing for their passing offense. So I wouldn't be too swayed by that. I think it's a game the Browns can win on the ground. But that's it for this week's questions. I want to thank you guys for asking them. And as always, have a great day. Have a good night.